Qassam Brigade spokesperson Abu Ubaidah, he said that tonight they will be releasing the bodies of Israelis. 11 at night, it's suspected, so pretty much now in occupied Jerusalem time. And the release will be simultaneous. So this is a very important update. Now, for those of you who haven't been monitoring what happened in the past couple of days, or in the past week to be more specific, Benjamin Netanyahu decided not to release the Palestinian prisoners following the release of Israeli prisoners of war from Gaza. According to him, he didn't like the ceremonies. He had a couple of complaints. And he said Hamas just need to release them anyway. A week before, he made similar threats. As a matter of fact, he's been having these threats and delays since the beginning of the ceasefire. The delay of the allowing of people to go back to the north of Gaza, therefore delaying the Israeli withdrawal from the Netzarim corridor, delays in releasing Palestinian prisoners, for the same reasons, by the way. Only for then, Benjamin Netanyahu, for then to come back and go ahead with the ceasefire agreement. All right. Why is he doing that? Why is Benjamin Netanyahu doing that? What's the point in saying, I'm going to release someone, and then he's not releasing them, and then he's going to release them? What is the point? You make yourself look like a fool who's backing down, is submitting to the will of the Palestinian resistance. He's doing that for a main reason, which is to constantly delay things. Benjamin Netanyahu is very interested in delaying the completion of phase 1 as much as possible before going into phase 2. And all of his attempts to delay the war, to delay the ceasefire, to cancel the ceasefire before that, to make it impossible to reach a ceasefire agreement, putting aside some of his delegation that were negotiating, the negotiating delegation made up of people who are the most senior figures in Israel, already accepted a permanent ceasefire. Just 1 or 2 months in, after the temporary ceasefire was broken by Israel, it was then signed by the then defense minister, who was also a wanted criminal for the ICC, Yoav Gallant. But Benjamin Netanyahu was constantly delaying that, and the delegation at the time said very clearly, if we continue down this path of the prime minister delaying, we will end up negotiating for a year at least. And this is what's happening. So now he's into the ceasefire agreement. He's trying to delay as much as possible so that he doesn't get into phase 2. And we'll talk about phase 2 in a minute, and the important statements that came from Donald Trump about phase 2. So he wants to delay things for his own purposes, and now he is conceding. Yet again, militant approach, and he also wants to show this image of someone who is victorious, who can say things and make things happen and delay and breach without being challenged too much. An image, but he eventually concedes. And now that's happening. But what that's making in return is making the deal more difficult for him and for Israel. Why? Because now all of a sudden the Palestinian resistance are refusing to release any Israeli unless Israel is releasing the Palestinians at the same time, and there's a joint room of the Palestinian resistance confirming that they are being released. And not only that, they're not releasing the bodies to Israel. The 4 bodies, who are going to be released tonight, are going to be released to Egypt. They're not going to be released to Israel. And the fact that they're going to go to Egypt before they go to Israel means that Egypt can potentially play a role in delaying handing these Israeli bodies if Israel does not comply. If Israel does not comply with the ceasefire agreement and they don't release the Palestinian prisoners. Now, another interesting thing is the negotiating delegation blamed Netanyahu again. They speak anonymously to the Israeli media and to other media too, sometimes American media, saying that this delay achieved nothing. But it did achieve something, which is making it more difficult, adding conditions from the Palestinian resistance on Israel. But they're saying it achieved nothing for the sake of Israel and the interest of Israel. To the contrary, it did the opposite. And they also said, the source said as well, what has happened is a delay of phase 2 negotiations, again confirming that Benjamin Netanyahu is interested in delaying going into phase 2, second part of the negotiations. So the Palestinians, of course, from their side, they confirmed the prisoner office. 620 Palestinian prisoners will be released in the 7th batch of the free flood deal. They confirmed that that's going to happen tonight. And what are the indications that that's going to happen? Israel has already begun attacking the houses of the prisoners who are to be released. Why? To prevent any events of happiness or any shows of celebration. They want to ban people from being happy that their loved ones are being released. They're going there, intimidating, threatening, bullying the families. Sometimes they imprison people and beat them as well. And they tell them, oh, you can't be happy that your relatives are going to be released. And they also, on some of them, they seized some of their properties, by the way, because to them, oh no, they shouldn't have any property when they're released. So this is a confirmation that Israel will be releasing them this evening. However, without an event and without a ceremony. How is all of that seen by the American administration? And what is the role of the US administration now? And what is Donald Trump saying? These things are very important because, well, Benjamin Netanyahu did not get into the ceasefire agreement up until he had this famous call with Steve Witkoff, who told him, the hell that you're talking about, that we were talking about, includes Israel. But now there was a confirmation coming from Donald Trump, who is saying that, no, actually, we're going into phase 2. So he made a couple of important statements in the media that, no, phase 2 is going to go ahead, and it's up to Israel to do what it wants, to see what it needs to do. Israel needs to decide what it wants to do with this. But he, at the end of his statement, he said that phase A of the deal ends and phase 2 begins. He's saying that after he said the 4 bodies of hostages are arriving today. And he said that Hamas think they're doing us a favor by returning bodies. Clearly, he has this, he's really annoyed, Hamas really annoyed arrogant Trump and arrogant Netanyahu. And eventually he said, no, phase A ends and phase 2 begins. Okay. He's stating that as a fact. Donald Trump is not stating like, oh, we're going to see what happens and we're going to see what we're going to do. No, he's saying this as a fact. Phase 1 ends and phase 2 begins. That means that the United States administration, from this statement or from this slip, and of course, we need to see things being implemented on the ground, they've already decided that their next strategic move in the ceasefire is making it continue, not stop now. What are the other indications that they're interested in going to phase 2? Well, Steve Witkoff had similar statements that we're going into phase 2. The only thing that he said is, well, it's going to be a little bit difficult because, Israel wants Hamas to disarm, and they know that Hamas are tough on the negotiating table. And simultaneously had these threats of expelling the Palestinians from Gaza and other threats as well. Clearly not working, but clearly indicating that the United States administration wants to get into phase 2 of the ceasefire. What are the signs from Israel? Well, there are a couple of signs, but it gets tricky and complicated again because of Benjamin Netanyahu. The signs are as follows. Israel already sent a delegation before to Qatar to tell them that we are going, to show them that we are going and beginning on phase 2. Israel showed interest in going into the phase 2 negotiations. Nothing in the Israeli media indicates in a very likely or very clear way that we're going into a full-scale war when phase 1 ends. But Benjamin Netanyahu did that deliberately. He deliberately keeps this lack of clarity, the shadow over everything, or all this doubt. Why? Because, well, he promised Smotrich that no, we're going into a war again when phase one ends, to keep him with him, hoping that as he managed to convince him to get into phase one of the ceasefire, whilst criticizing it and not resigning like Ben Gvir did, he can potentially buy himself a bit of time with him to come up with a formula that would convince him to remain in the government without Benjamin Netanyahu having to resort to asking the opposition to give him a safety network and for them to join the government. Why? Because they're more difficult. Benjamin Netanyahu, everyone tested him in Israel, and they know how he is as a person, how much of a psychopathic, selfish, self-engulfed individual he is, and psychopathic. So he doesn't want criticism. They will be criticizing him at one point. And even if they give him a safety net, they'll tell him we need to have elections, early elections at one point. We're not going to wait up until the actual date of elections in 2026. And therefore, Netanyahu wants to delay that. And also another thing that he has done, which is very important, is he removed the head of the Mossad. He removed the head of the Shabak or the Shin Bet from the negotiating delegation, appointing who? Ron Dermer. Why? Well, he previously banned the head of the Mossad and the head of the Shin Bet from going to negotiate. He made it impossible for them to reach an agreement. And in the majority of the cases that he sent them to negotiate, he sent them without authority. He sent them without the authority or power to reach a deal. And he previously criticized them, saying, oh, you don't know how to negotiate. I was the one negotiating. I need to negotiate. I know how to deal with Hamas, and I need to have the ultimate decision. And he also sent his own office advisors with the negotiating delegation to make sure that they comply. So things have been tense between him and the head of the Mossad and the head of the Shabak from a while ago. And Ron Dermer is viewed as a person who is very close to Benjamin Netanyahu. As a matter of fact, people are saying that he might actually give him the position of the head of the Mossad. How long will that relationship last? We don't know, because Benjamin Netanyahu had many allies who were very strongly close to him, but they eventually left him because they found out who he really is. However, when it comes to the negotiations, what's more certain now is that Ron Dermer will play a bigger role in implementing what Benjamin Netanyahu wants in the negotiations, which means he will be happy with the fact that he won't be getting the power to sign a deal, authorize a deal without Benjamin Netanyahu's consent, and he will do that in the timeline that is suitable for Benjamin Netanyahu. Not if all of a sudden there are certain developments or there are breakthroughs in phase two, then Ron Dermer says fine, and then he signs it. No, he would need to go back to Benjamin Netanyahu. All of these things indicate or mean that phase two, we're going into phase two by the looks of it. We by the looks of things and by the developments, we are looking into going into phase two. But judging by all of this information, it looks like phase two will be more complicated, and there might be delays going into phase two. And Israel will try and potentially stretch phase one for several weeks, maybe, up until they go into phase two, again, to buy Benjamin Netanyahu time and try and get his issues with his close allies in the coalition sorted. He also has the budget approval issue, which is worrying him very much in Israel. But that will be causing problems. Now, is Benjamin Netanyahu anticipating these problems? And what are these problems? Well, these problems are, if phase one is extended, Hamas are highly unlikely to be releasing anyone. Hamas said phase two includes more released so long as Israel confirms ending the war and talking about the rebuilding of Gaza. Although the ceasefire in its current form, which includes phase 1, 2, and 3, and the periods between them, does not state anything explicit or clear, blatant about Hamas leaving Gaza. This is very important. Hamas would have never agreed to sign such an agreement. That's why Israel is trying all of this now, because the agreement that Benjamin Netanyahu signed leaves the fate of Gaza, or the day after in Gaza, to the hands of the Palestinian people. And this was confirmed by a senior member of the negotiating delegation who spoke on the basis of anonymity with one of the families of the Israeli prisoners of war, also saying that some of these people, if we are too difficult, we might never see them again, especially those who were from the Gaza division, from the army, and the commanders who were the first to be taken to Gaza as prisoners of war on the 7th of October. That's why it's so complicated. That's why there are so many delays. And it could also be a reason why Benjamin Netanyahu is having these delays now, to test the Israeli public and their acceptance or lack thereof of any delay, of any prospect of more delay for the release of the Israelis who are remaining in Gaza. So far, phase 1, only a third of those who remained. Now there's 2/3, so the bigger chunk is there. And he has to take them out. He has no option. These people are the Israeli army. What kind of message are you going to be sending the soldiers you sent to die for you? Without them going to neglect you if Hamas take you? He has to. Plus the pressure in the streets, the pressure of the families of the prisoners of war, political pressure, security pressure, and also global pressure, alongside the other elements, of course, primarily the resilience of the Palestinian people in Gaza and the resistance as well, and the other factors in the resistance fronts who applied pressure on Israel and attacked Israel during all of this time. Israel and the United States, both of them know that if they break the ceasefire, a front will automatically launch, and that's the front of Yemen. And no one should underestimate the front of Yemen. The front of Yemen made the biggest economic damage to Israel and to the genocide coalition, primarily the United States and Britain. And now that they know things are moving, including military and economy, everything is fine, for them to go back to square one only for the sake of Benjamin Netanyahu because he doesn't want to go to phase 2, it would be very, very stupid, to say the least. Not that it wasn't stupid or abhorrent or whatever you want to say, with the fact that they were already supporting Israel and fighting the country that bravely stood up against this genocide entity.